Let me ask you something soft but deeply human. When was the last time you truly experienced your birthday? Not just noticed it, not just replied "thank you" to a few messages, but genuinely felt it the way you once did as a child. Remember how your heart used to race at the sight of balloons, the smell of cake, and that fleeting magic of everyone's eyes turning toward you for one small, sacred day that belonged only to you. Fast forward to adulthood. The same date appears on the calendar, but it carries no pulse. You wake up, maybe see a handful of notifications, maybe your mother calls, and then the day quietly dissolves into routine. You tell people you don't celebrate anymore. You say it's just another day, that it doesn't really matter. But is that entirely true? Because beneath that casual tone, beneath that practiced calm, there's often a quieter story, one we rarely tell out loud. People who treat their birthday like any ordinary day aren't cold or detached. In fact, they're often the ones who feel the deepest. They've simply learned to lower their expectations because disappointment taught them how. Psychologically, birthdays are emotional mirrors. They reveal how we feel about being alive, how we relate to attention, and how comfortable we are being seen. When someone says, "I don't care about my birthday," what they often mean is, "I've stopped waiting for others to care." There's a difference between emotional maturity and emotional retreat, and birthdays quietly expose which one we've chosen. Some people truly outgrow the thrill of birthdays, not out of bitterness, but out of peace. They've discovered joy in small moments, in ordinary days, in the quiet rhythm of life. To them, celebration doesn't need candles or crowds. It lives in the simple act of being. But for others, the story runs deeper. Their birthday carries a certain unease, not because of growing older, but because of memory. Maybe birthdays remind them of the times they were overlooked. Maybe they once cared too much and were met with silence. So now, instead of saying, "I hope someone remembers," they whisper, "It's just another day." It's not indifference, it's armor. It's protection disguised as composure. And that's where psychology becomes fascinating, because it shows how the mind learns to adapt. After enough emotional letdowns, the brain begins to lower the bar. It's called emotional self-protection, the art of expecting less to hurt less. You teach yourself not to hope too loudly. You train your heart to stay steady when joy has too often felt like a risk. But here's the quiet paradox. The same protection that keeps you safe also keeps you distant from joy. The heart that once wanted celebration now treads gently around happiness. You begin to move through your own life like a guest at your own party, smiling, polite, present, but detached. And think about how many people you know who say lightly, "Oh, I don't really do birthdays." Yet later that night, they scroll through their messages again, replaying the day in their mind, noticing who didn't reach out, who stayed silent. We all do it, even the ones who say they don't care. Because even pretending not to care is still caring, just in disguise. Psychologists call this avoidant validation behavior. When we convince ourselves we don't need acknowledgement because we fear not getting it. It often develops in people who once learned that emotional needs were inconvenient, that it was safer to want less than to be disappointed again. So when someone treats their birthday like it's just another Tuesday, don't mistake that for emotional emptiness. More often than not, they've simply made peace with being let down. They've traded excitement for control. But control, while comforting, always comes with a cost. Because beneath that calm exterior, beneath the phrase, "it's just another day," lies a quiet truth. Everyone, no matter how self-contained, still wants to be seen. There's something sacred about birthdays. Even when they're quiet, they mark existence. They whisper, "You made it another year." Not because of what you've achieved, but simply because you're still here. That single fact, your continued existence, carries meaning. And yet, that meaning feels different for everyone. For some, it's gratitude. For others, loneliness. And for many, it's both. A strange blend of nostalgia and numbness. Because birthdays are not just about the present moment. They're mirrors reflecting time itself. They remind you of how far you've come and how far you haven't. That's what makes them so quietly powerful and sometimes quietly painful. For some, calling it just another day is their way of keeping time from feeling too heavy. If you don't make a big deal out of it, maybe it won't remind you how quickly everything changes. Maybe it won't feel like another year slipping through your hands. And beyond the personal, there's something cultural happening too. In childhood, birthdays are social milestones. They connect you to belonging, to celebration, to visibility. But adulthood changes the script. The spotlight that once thrilled you now feels strange, maybe even uncomfortable. You start to wrestle with the quiet tug-of-war between wanting to be noticed and wanting to avoid attention, between craving connection and fearing exposure. That inner tension shows up subtly, in how you downplay your own importance, in how you smile and say, "It's fine, really." Because when you've spent years being the reliable one, the strong one, the giver, your mind learns a quiet rule. Your joy comes second. You become the person who remembers everyone else's birthdays, yet forgets your own. And slowly, that date on the calendar begins to feel irrelevant, like it belongs more to a past version of you than the person you've become. If someone threw you a surprise party, you might not even know what to do with it. You'd probably smile awkwardly, thank them, and then retreat into a quiet corner. Not because you're ungrateful, but because being celebrated feels foreign, almost too bright. But here's the truth. That discomfort with being celebrated isn't humility. It's exhaustion. It's the quiet fatigue of someone who's carried too much and been seen too little. Deep down, they still long for recognition, but not the loud kind. They don't crave parties or gifts. They crave understanding. They want someone to remember not just their birthday, but who they've been becoming all year. And that's one of the great paradoxes of emotional maturity. The more self-sufficient you become, the harder it feels to receive love without suspicion. Birthdays, then, become neutral spaces, places where vulnerability should live, but instead, practicality takes its place. You tell yourself, "It's fine. Let's just get through the day." But behind that tone of calm, your mind is still processing. Nostalgia for the joy that once came easily, sadness for connections that have faded, gratitude for survival, and a quiet longing for simplicity. That's what makes this feeling so universal. Even if you believe you've outgrown birthdays, some part of you still remembers what it felt like to be celebrated without hesitation. There's a subtle moment psychologists call temporal self-awareness, the instant you quietly compare who you were last year with who you are now. It's a natural reflection that often surfaces around Birthdays, even when you least expect it. You wake up, glance at the date, and without consciously meaning to, your mind starts measuring progress, change, loss, and distance. Sometimes that reflection brings peace. Other times, it stirs discomfort. Because birthdays are less like parties and more like mirrors. They don't just celebrate what is. They reveal what's missing. The space between your intentions and your reality. And for many people, that reflection can feel too sharp, too honest. So, rather than confront it, they blur the edges. They say, "It's just another day." But what they mean is, "I'm still processing my own timeline." It's not avoidance, it's introspection. It's the human mind's quiet way of saying, "I need space to understand how I feel about my own story." So, if you've ever felt strange about your birthday, if you've woken up and felt nothing where excitement used to live, know that it doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It means you're aware. You've grown enough to feel the weight of meaning. You understand that celebration isn't about the noise outside you, but the alignment inside you. Because birthdays have never really been about age, they're about meaning. And as we grow older, that meaning becomes more personal, more internal. When you were a child, your birthday was the world recognizing you. As an adult, it becomes you recognizing yourself. It's no longer about presents, but presence. Not about who shows up, but about how much of you has shown up in your own life. That's the shift most people never talk about, the quiet transition from seeking validation to seeking understanding. And that's why many of us stop making a big deal out of it. It's not because we've stopped caring, it's because our definition of celebration has evolved. Maybe you no longer need a crowd. Maybe celebration now looks like a morning walk, a cup of coffee in silence, or a few hours spent reflecting on the year that's passed. It's not the loud joy of candles and clapping hands. It's the soft joy of being at peace with yourself. But even in that peace, a whisper remains, a small voice that says, "I hope someone remembers." And that doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Because emotional evolution doesn't erase longing, it refines it. You can be content and still crave connection. You can be grounded and still miss being seen. That's the duality of growing older. You can understand yourself deeply, yet still ache for simple recognition. Treating your birthday like any other day doesn't mean you're numb. It means you've learned that joy can exist quietly. That happiness doesn't always need to announce itself. It's a softer kind of celebration, one that happens internally, without an audience. It's invisible to others, but deeply real to you. And yet, there's another layer most people never realize. When someone treats their birthday like a normal day, they're not rejecting joy, they're redefining it. They're saying, "I no longer need the world's permission to feel good about being alive." That's one of the quietest, most profound signs of maturity. The moment you stop chasing external acknowledgement and start honoring your own existence. Because eventually, the things that once made you feel special, gifts, parties, posts, begin to lose their glow. What starts to matter more is alignment. The internal question becomes, did I live this year with truth? Did I show up when it mattered? Did I grow? And in that reflection, the birthday becomes less about age and more about authenticity, less about attention and more about awareness. For some people, this new kind of celebration feels natural, but for others, it feels hollow. Not because they lack gratitude, but because they miss what once was. They miss the excitement that used to come so easily before the years taught them restraint. And that's okay. Missing your younger self doesn't mean you've regressed. It means you're remembering what innocence felt like before you learned to protect it. There's a psychological term called self-concordant motivation. It describes the peace that comes when your actions finally align with your values. When what you do, what you believe, and who you are start to move in rhythm. So, when someone spends their birthday quietly, it's often not apathy, it's alignment. They're no longer chasing loud, fleeting joy. They're practicing steady, grounded contentment. They've replaced performance with peace. But even in that stillness, emotion hums beneath the surface. Because while some people genuinely feel content in solitude, others quietly wish they didn't have to. They wish someone else would remember, that they wouldn't have to pretend it doesn't matter. And that tension between wanting to be noticed and wanting to seem unbothered is one of the most human contradictions there is. We all hold it. The longing to be seen without having to ask for it. The desire to be celebrated without needing to announce it. It's the quiet ache that lives between independence and intimacy. There's a fascinating truth hidden inside all this. Even the most independent people still carry a quiet hope that someone, somewhere, will see through their calm. Psychologists call this earned secure attachment. It happens when people who have faced emotional inconsistencies in their past learn to rely on themselves, but still yearn, deep down, to be understood without having to explain. They build strength, but not without softness. They survive without needing much, but part of them still dreams of being gently cared for. That's why birthdays, no matter how small, still matter. Because even the most self-sufficient soul wants to know that their existence registered somewhere, that someone, even quietly, remembered. So a birthday becomes a silent test, not an intentional one, but an emotional one. The mind takes quiet notes. Who reached out? Who didn't need reminding? Who still sees me when I've gone quiet? Even when you tell yourself it doesn't matter, a part of you still checks. That's not weakness. That's humanity. Because no matter how aware, how evolved, or how independent you become, the need for connection never disappears. It simply hides in quieter corners of your heart. And that's why birthdays feel heavier than we admit. Not because of the candles, but because of what they represent. Time, connection, memory, and meaning. For some, birthdays feel like milestones. For others, they feel like mirrors, and the mind treats them differently depending on the story you've lived. If the past year brought joy, the day feels like progress. But if the year brought confusion or loss, the same day can feel like pressure, a quiet confrontation with yourself. It's not denial when people blur their birthdays into ordinary days. It's self-preservation. It's the psyche saying, "I'll reflect when I'm ready." But even then, the day carries a pulse. It stirs nostalgia, gratitude, sadness, all at once. Because somewhere in that internal reflection, something sacred unfolds. You begin to realize that birthdays, stripped of their noise and expectation, are actually checkpoints of consciousness. They ask questions no one else can ask for you. Am I living honestly? Am I proud of who I've become? Do I still recognize the person I'm becoming? And maybe that's why some of us keep our birthdays quiet, because those questions are intimate. Not every kind of growth needs to be witnessed. Not every transformation needs an audience. Sometimes growth is invisible. It shows up in the way you breathe before reacting, in how you forgive faster, in how you find beauty in moments you used to overlook. That, perhaps, is the truest form of celebration, when you don't need a date to feel alive because you've learned to find aliveness in the ordinary. Still, even the calmest souls deserve light. The people who say, "It's just another day," are often the same ones who hold space for everyone else, who remember your milestones, who check in first, who love without making noise. And sometimes, those people forget that they too deserve to be remembered, that it's okay to let others give back, that it's not weakness to want warmth. Even the quietest hearts still need to be seen, not for what they do, but for who they are. That longing isn't selfish, it's sacred, because beneath every calm birthday is the same heartbeat that's always been there, a reminder that connection still matters, that being human is not about being untouched by emotion, but being open enough to feel it. Birthdays aren't about perfection or performance. They're about presence, about honoring the fact that you're still here, still learning, still growing, still unfolding. So maybe the psychology of treating your birthday like a normal day isn't about detachment at all. Maybe it's about integration, about weaving reflection and peace into the same moment, about realizing that joy doesn't have to shout to be real. And yet, in that silence, never underestimate the power of small gestures. One text, one voice message, one quiet acknowledgement can mean the world to someone who pretends they don't care. Because for them, it's never about the size of the celebration. It's about sincerity, about knowing that their quiet existence still ripples outward, that they still matter. That's what all of this comes down to. Deep beneath every birthday, every quiet shrug, every "it's just another day," lies the same truth. None of us want to be invisible. We just want to be loved in the language we understand. Some people want fireworks. Others just want peace. Some people want crowds. Others want one person who truly listens. And there's nothing wrong with any of it. There's no single way to exist. So if your birthday feels ordinary, if you woke up, made your coffee, went to work and carried on, maybe that's not emptiness. Maybe that's evolution. Maybe it's gratitude in disguise. Because what you're really saying is, my life is already meaningful enough. I don't need a single day to prove it. But still, let yourself be soft. Let yourself feel the echo of childhood wonder. Remember the small hands that once counted down to midnight with glowing eyes, believing one day could hold infinite magic. That child is still in you, waiting not for a party, but for acknowledgement. So whisper to them, "Hey, I see you." We made it another year, because that's the celebration that never fades when the candles go out. That's the one that stays with you, quietly, eternally. You don't have to make a wish. You already are one, a living continuation of every version of yourself that made it here. And that alone is worth celebrating.